Okay, good morning everyone. Thanks everyone for coming. My name's Jenny Lannon. I'm a statistician at NHS Blood and Transplant, and that's where YSM was held this year. First of all, I'd like to congratulate our two presenters for winning the presentation prizes for YSM. So first of all, we have Hannah Thomas from ONS, and she'll be talking on sharing knowledge through Wikipedia.
Hello. Okay, I'm going to have to excuse my slightly juvenile slides because the talk was originally on Friday afternoon, so I kind of changed them to kind of make it a bit more engaging. So the talk is meant to be then and now exclusively about us sharing knowledge on Wikipedia. But due to people getting promoted and people changing jobs and financial constraints, the project hasn't got as far as we would have liked. So it's still going to be a little bit more general, but still with a focus on Wikipedia, but in general about communicating statistics. Okay. So it's going to talk about Wikipedia first, and then about infographics done at ONS and the developments we've made there, about videos and slide shares, about social media, and interactive material, although I do know Alan Smith has been here talking a little bit about that, so I'm not going to go into too much depth on it. Okay, so first of all, Wikipedia. So why should we share knowledge through Wikipedia? Well, first of all, it's streamlined and simplified. One of the things I first did when I worked on this project was to look at UK unemployment, because I previously worked on the labour market analysis team, so something I knew about. And if you go to ONS and you want to know about UK unemployment, you get, you get a load of different pages. So we have lots and lots of data, lots and lots of information, but it's not very streamlined, it's not very simplified, it's not very easy to find. And so it's quite difficult if you just kind of want, depending on what you want to know about unemployment, if you want to know details about how it's measured and the key figures, and maybe unemployment in your local area, stuff like that. We have loads of stuff and it's just all a bit confusing. Wikipedia has just one page called Unemployment in the United Kingdom, which if you Google it will come up quite high on search engine results, and it's something that users feel comfortable with Wikipedia, like they would click on a Wikipedia page because they're used to that website, they know what that website is. So like I said, it is where people go. This is a good example here is 0 hour contracts. So this is a chart showing the traffic statistics to the 0 hour contract article on Wikipedia. And this peak here corresponds with the ONS release on 0 hour contracts. So it kind of indicates that people are seeing there's data out, but whether they know it's from ONS or not, they've seen that there's data on 0 hour contracts, they're interested in it. If you Google 0 hour contracts, again, the Wikipedia article comes up quite high because we don't call them 0 hour contracts, we call them non-guaranteed hours contracts. For some reason, I'm not quite sure. So we don't perform very well on search engines because of that. Wikipedia does. This massive peak correlates when it's released, so then it shows that people are kind of going to Wikipedia to get information. It's also a tool to inform us. So we can look at pages that have been created. So there's been a page created on the Help to Buy scheme, the bedroom tax, and the living wage. Again, we don't call it the bedroom tax, we call it the under occupancy penalty. So again, there's things like this, but we can put we can suggest to the statisticians then, can we call it bedroom tax, maybe in a sort of shorter article or something like that? Can we put that somewhere in the story so the search engines can pick up this is about bedroom tax? And so it's a tool to inform what are people calling things, what are they interested in, and the indication that these pages have been created indicates that people are interested in this stuff, so maybe we should do more stuff explaining the data on these topics. Also, if you look at content on existing pages, so on the UK unemployment page, the main things on there before I edited it were EU comparisons, explaining the difference to the numbers that the Eurostat publishes in UK unemployment and why we have different numbers on it. And then the history of UK unemployment statistics. That then tells us, so this is what people are interested in, so maybe we should put out more projects based around what people are interested in. It also helps us clear up misconceptions. So there was a big section on the UK unemployment page about hidden statistics, and this was a lot to do with what was published on Eurostat and how it was different to what ONS published. So you can't see this very well in here, but this is just the section on hidden statistics. But much of what is hidden is published by the ONS, it's just people can't find it. So this is, we can then use Wikipedia as a tool to clear up misconceptions that people have about us hiding statistics or misreporting statistics. It's also a really nice way to learn. if you've got a new starter in any role, in any office, and you want them to learn about the statistics you publish, I know when I started in labour market statistics, I was just given a bunch of stuff to read and just said, this is stuff we put out last year, just read this stuff and then you understand the kind of stuff we put out. But that's a very sort of passive way of learning, because you're just sitting there and you just read it and you're looking at stuff. Whereas if you're told, okay, read the stuff, but then use this stuff to update the Wikipedia page on this topic, that's a much more active way of learning and you're much more engaged and you know someone's expecting something of you. So it should help to engage new starters. And I know from ONS point of view, there's a lot of new starters this week. And as sort of like all the graduates who left uni in the summer started now, so it's a really nice idea for that. Okay, so how have we done it? Well, we have started doing some presentations, we have started doing some training, mostly on, not on how to, actually editing Wikipedia isn't that difficult, but training on etiquette. So you should announce an edit before you just make it. You should go on the talk page and announce that this is what you plan to do, so that if anyone has any problems with it, they can, instead of just wiping out everything you edited, can sort of bring it up and you can have a discussion with them. So mostly on stuff like that. We're hoping to in the future, it was meant to be up and running already, but it hasn't happened, but a Wiki enthusiast group, and then hold Wiki lunches, which have been held. My boss has previously done this in other places he's worked, where they just sort of have a load of laptops, but then you supply people food, so people are attracted to come because there's food, and then you give them laptops and say, oh, go and edit this Wikipedia page, and while you're there, we can help you do it. And also a newsletter saying, I know when I look over media, my job's a bit different now, so I've sort of, I look at media reviews of things and see like, what are people talking about, what should we maybe be covering, that's part of my job. And a lot of the time, you can see, so people are talking about, say, 0-hour contracts, and then you can say, okay, if we Google that, what comes up, where would people go? Or they go to the Wikipedia page. So I make a note of that, and I make a note of how many hits that page has had. So then I can say, like, these things are popular. And then in a newsletter type thing, you say, do you know anything about these subjects? We need these pages to be updated. And you sort of send that around, and hopefully people will be engaged enough and come to a wiki lunch and say, I know about this subject, I'm happy to update this page. So problems. This is a problem I think lots of people would find. There's not enough time and resource. My job has changed massively, so I haven't been able to devote as much time to the project as I was able to. People do remove edits, or they change edits, especially in kind of political things like unemployment. So people have their own view on what the government's trying to do with unemployment figures, and they kind of communicate that view through Wikipedia or through changing something on Wikipedia. But like I said, if you do it via the talk page and you sort of announce a change before you make it, then you can avoid that instead of just going in and editing something and then someone will come on the next day and change it all back to the way it was. Some topics have lots of pages, so a few different people have created pages when really they should all live on one, so there is still a little bit of problem with that, and that takes a little bit of time to sort out, but it can be sorted out. And there are some staff worries in ONS about whether it is the appropriate place to find official statistics. Should we be helping people go to Wikipedia, or should we be directing them back to our website? And in an ideal world, it'd be nice for them to come to our website. But the website isn't great. People don't come there. People are maybe a little bit more afraid of it than they would be of a Wikipedia page. And the good thing about it is ONS is unbiased, it's independent. A lot of our stuff is communicated via the media, which is not independent and not unbiased. But Wikipedia is, because it's editable by everyone, it should remain unbiased. If someone puts something up that's very, very biased, it should, and it usually does get changed quite quickly into a more independent view. Okay, that's about Wikipedia, and I would love to talk more about that, but we haven't got far enough, so this is just a few other things we've been doing. So, infographics. This was my first infographic type thing I did when I first started ONS, and we've got a bit slicker since then. So we've produced things like this data infographics. This one is the 10 most common cancers. This is quite a popular one, and it remains quite popular. And I like these these data ones, because they're just very simple, they just show the data. And yeah, so you can see for men and women, because there are big differences. But I can't read it now, but you can see where they are. And if you look at it, it's quite easy to read, and it proved very popular. We also put out some explainer infographics. This is showing goods that have entered and left the basket of goods to calculate inflation. So it's just explaining how that basket of goods changes, because lots of people don't really have an understanding of how we calculate inflation. That's quite nice when we've put out a few others. And I like these because they have a bit of a longer shelf life, because if an infographic is just showing you the most recent data, people tend to look at it for maybe the first couple of weeks, and then the views tend to tail off. But with explainer products, because they're not about current data, they tend to get more views and more steady views, because people will constantly sort of go back to them because they're explaining something if they're good. And then this was what we did recently. This is my favourite thing recently. You can't really see them, I know, down there, but this is the baby names release, which is always a very popular release, the ONS. It does always get some criticism every year, but this year it didn't get as much as it normally does, and this is quite nice. We did a short piece on this called a listicle, so it's a list article, like you see on BuzzFeed and things like that, and more websites have started doing it. And this is about how celebrities and characters in books and films have had impact on baby names that are chosen. So the top one is obviously Harry Potter, so Harry Potter names. And that isn't an infographic, that's just like facts. But the rest were line charts, and we had 10,000 views to this page on the website, which is huge for us. It eclipses nearly every GDP even, you know. So this was really nice to have all the views, and to get people who are looking at line charts who might never look at a line chart, and maybe have a better understanding of what the line chart is showing them. And we can't see them very clearly, but there is one about footballers, there's one about Thorne, Loki, and there's one about the Beckham babies, and you can see a peak when the Beckham babies are born, a peak in the popularity of their name. So it is a bit frivolous and a bit different, but if it gets people engaged and gets people to the website and gets people knowing even who ONS are, and then that's a good thing. On to videos. We have produced some videos. They kind of tailed off a bit. They got a little bit less popular with other things taking over. But this is one explaining inflation. And then this is one that's a bit more, it's not very slick, doesn't look very slick, but it's got 15,000 views because it just explains the balance of payments current account very clearly. So it doesn't always got to be really slick. If they explain something very clearly, then they can also be popular. And something I also started working on when I moved into this role before it changed a bit was doing sort of more educational pieces, but not just explaining stuff, but just giving like the most recent data and things. So NEETs is something that always comes up, so not in education, employment or training. I think it's every quarter the numbers get updated, and it does often get a lot of media interest. And so I just sort of made this, this gives you like the key numbers straight away. So the definition, then the number of people. So they're just little PowerPoints that I've just put on SlideShare, and people can pick them up, can download them, can look at them online. And they're quite nice because when you share them on Twitter, you haven't just got to have one key figure, you can have them, and then people can scroll through so they can see a few key figures and presented quite clearly. Yes, this isn't something the office has yet picked up, but it's something I quite like, and because you don't have to concentrate on one number. It doesn't take a lot of design time. It's quite quick and easy to get that out there. It's another thing, speaking in the office, is social media, particularly Twitter. I know you can't see this number now because it's quite light, but I think it's on, there it was on 57, I think it's on 66,000 now, so 66,000 followers to the ONS Twitter. That's a really important way for us to get information out to people. But we also have a presence on various other websites. None are as accessible as Twitter, but the Wikipedia Commons and the Flickr are both where we can put images, and they are free for everyone to use and pick up and use them wherever they like. And the ones that are on Wikipedia Commons that have been picked up get way, way more views than anything we've put on our website because they're just there and they're free and easy to get. Okay, and so a little bit about the interactive material. So we have things like interactive maps, population pyramids, which you can change over time. You're not very good at showing a PowerPoint because I can't show you how they're working, so they just look static, but they're not static, obviously they're interactive. The well-being wheel gets updated with different measures, and then this is Anna Smith's new thing, which is really nice. I don't know if you've heard of it yet, but how well do you know your area? So you type in your postcode, and then it asks you all different questions based on census data about your postcode, so you can see how well you know it, and do you get like how many people have a car or a van, and you can guess what percentage of people have a car, or do not own, sorry, a car or a van, how many people own their own home. So you can guess this stuff and then see how well you know your local area, and it's gone down really well and was embedded on a few websites and picked up really well. Okay, so work for the future. Yes, I do want to do this. So doing the local Wikipedia project and get more people updating stuff. And yes, build a new website. That is a massive project going on in the office at the moment, and it's been going on for a long time. So hopefully next year, though I have been told, hopefully we'll have a brand new, shiny website that will work and everything. Improve the access to our data through getting it out to places like Wikipedia, but also making it easier for people to find the Excel spreadsheet and making that Excel spreadsheet, maybe not even having it as Excel, but having it on a very basic spreadsheet and making it very easy to pick up and use online. Because at the moment, they're all kind of based on making them look nice when they're printed out. And that isn't really as useful for everyone. And continue the way the office works together to ensure the appropriate project is used for the appropriate release. So what is this audience? Who is the audience you're aiming for? What is the best product for that audience? Okay, thank you for listening. And if there are any questions?
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. Anyone have any questions? Okay, I'd like to start then. When you say that people go into your Wikipedia page and change things, do you actually get notified of that? Yeah,
you can have email notifications, so you can see that you can sort of monitor a page, and then you can see that someone has edited the page, and you can look what they've said, and sometimes it's fine. Sometimes they've just changed a definition, not a definition, but just changed wording slightly, but the actual message is the same. Or sometimes there is an issue, and if there's an issue, you can contact that user directly, or just via the talk page on that article, and then you can sort of have a discussion with them through there, and why they changed it, and was there a particular strong reason why they felt they had to change it. I
do have another one. Is there any work that's going on to try and decrease the resistance against Wikipedia? So when people feel that it's not the best place to put that information.
Yeah, well, when it's launched properly, there will be more precision, to gain more understanding of Wikipedia and how it works, and to try and convince people that if people go there, we need to communicate statistics with people, then we need to put it where they actually go, maybe not always try and force them back to our website.
Yeah. Okay, we have a question over here.
Hi, thank you. I just wondered if you've addressed things like kite marks and branding so that people know, not only that graphs, for example, that are on Wikipedia pages are from ONS, but also that ONS has some simple quality that they can rely on it and things like that.
There's branding and all the infographics and all the things that are uploaded to Wikipedia Commons. There's always an ONS logo on the bottom there. And we do get some emails in to people ask us, can we just use these freely? And the answer is always just yes. We want as many people to see them as possible. But yeah, there's always some branding on there. And they are always meant to look the same font, same colours, roughly, same kind of feel to them.
We have one more question over there.
Thank you. I just wondered how you measure how successful things have been on the websites.
On our website?
Yeah, things that you put out there. Is it number of hits and that sort of thing?
Yeah, there are a few different ways you can do. And we do have web analytics data, which shows number of views to the page. It's sometimes a bit difficult because if people, like with the baby name stuff, there was 10,000 views on our listicle, our page, but then we knew it was picked up and used on loads of other websites. So obviously it's very difficult then, just how many people actually saw that information. It's also picked up in print media. So it's very difficult to measure that. And sometimes with infographics, it's a bit difficult because seeing how many people viewed them on our website, but then a lot of them are shared on Twitter as full infographics sometimes. And then so you have to look at Twitter views as well. And Twitter have got much better at releasing data about, so you can see how many people's feeds it came up on, and then you can see how many people did something as a result of that feed. So either clicked on the link or made a comment or set it as a favourite. So that's very useful to us as well. But yeah, most on the website is about views. But then also, And sometimes you can have a lot of views to something because maybe the title is really good and it comes up really high in search engines, but the view time can be very low, it can be like 10 seconds. So then you have to look at the view time as well, because it might be loads of people going to this page, but maybe the page is rubbish because like, why are people only looking for 10 seconds? And then alternatively, sometimes you can get something, maybe the hits aren't as high because it doesn't come up very high on search engines, but the view time is quite long. And then so when they found it, they were interested in it. It's just not when people found it. So it is, you know, you can't say anything for definite, but that's how we're measuring it at the moment, and we are trying to look for more ways all the time and seeing how we can measure engagement.
And we have time for one more question. I think there was one over there.
I was interested to hear about plans for a new website, ONS website. Of course, all the statistics coming out from government departments are now on gov.uk. I just hope that ONS is thinking about how the data on gov.uk and the ONS website, how it all links together, because it all looks rather split between the departments and ONS.
Oh, okay. I'm not an expert on the website development, but that is something I can take back. At the moment, the new website isn't set up to come to next year, but there is a WordPress site, just like a blogging site, which is going to run alongside the current website. But that's just going to have articles, so it won't have data, but just sort of articles and things like listicles and interactive stuff is going to live on that website. Yeah. But yeah, I get it. It doesn't look very tied up at the moment. It looks like ONS stuff and then other people's stuff. Yeah. So yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So our next speaker, sorry. Our next speaker is Zhou Fang from Biomathematics and Statistics Scotland, and it's a very topical talk because it's about the Scottish referendum, which is obviously in 2 weeks' time. So Zhou will be trying to predict the results of the referendum.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So yeah, I recently moved to Edinburgh, and so my mother was sort of calling me all of a sudden, and she was very worried about this newfangled thing about Scottish independence. I mean, she was worried that the tartan curtain would suddenly be drawn along the old Hadrian's Wall, and then, you know, various predictions of doom that might occur. And I was thinking, okay, let's, you know, I'm a statistician, so let's look at the data, and let's try and figure out, can we actually try and make a prediction about whether or not Scotland is actually going to go independent or not? So this is sort of completely work that sort of I did on my own, and, you know, so it represents only the views of me and myself. I didn't fund it by anyone except my mother's lovely lunches and dinners. So again, this is a very dangerous talk because typically people give these predictions after the result. And so a lot of this presentation was made sort of in the middle of July. And so I was quite worried this Monday because there was a big announcement about a new YouGov poll. And, well, we'll get on to whether the really recent polls have changed results or not. So again, bear in mind that this is mainly based on data from the middle of July. Right. Now, in case you didn't know, Scots are due to give a vote. They're going to take part in a vote on the 18th of September, so that's only about 2 weeks from now, on whether or not Scotland becomes an independent country. There's been a huge amount of public interest. I mean, every other day it's on the front pages of most of the newspapers around here. And it's been a really intensely fought campaign. And sort of one of the interesting things about this campaign is that there's been a huge lot of focus on not just all these sort of flags and whether we're going to change the flag or not, but also on these sort of little pie charts which represent opinion polls. And so what these opinion polls are, they are the product of a large number of private companies who have been sort of asking people how and whether they're going to vote in a referendum. Now, we're going to focus on the more mainstream posters, these people who belong to the so-called British Polling Council, because they adhere to a sort of a standard, well, they adhere to a certain code of conduct about how they publish the methodology and so on. And now these polls, obviously, they produce a wealth of data, And in the past, people have been very successful at using opinion poll data to predict stuff like the results of the 2012 US elections. So the question we're going to try and answer is whether we can do a similar sort of analysis for a Scottish referendum. Now, this is a website called What Scotland Thinks. And this is a very good website if you're very obsessed with polls like I am. And so they run a running average of the six latest polls at each point in time. And you can see the sort of a general pattern is of a sort of a gradually narrowing of sort of the gap between yes and no, with no still ahead. Now, that sort of analysis sort of gives you a sort of a view of sort of the state of the polls, but it's difficult to extrapolate out from that to give an idea about, you know, what the sort of likelihood of yes or no winning is. If we go to Nate Silver, who was very successful in the 2012 elections, well, he has this to say: there is virtually no chance that this yes side will win. There's a wide variety of polls, and they all show the no vote ahead. And the best you can do is take an average of these polls. So I mean, the question we want to ask is it really true that there is virtually no chance that yes side will win, and whether or not it's true that the best you can do is take an average of the polls? So what we're going to do is that we're going to focus on the yes share of the non-undecided votes. So we're just going to eliminate all the people who say they don't know how they're going to vote. And again, another way of looking at the polls is that we can also use Sam Wang's median-based method. And so if we just take a running median of the polls, we'll end up with something like this. And again, you'll get to the rough theme of the yes share rising over time. But this sort of analysis is sort of insufficient in some ways because it's difficult to interpret how we're going to predict the vote for day zero, which is to say, you know, the day of the election itself. You can also see that this sort of line is very non-smooth. And the other thing is that it ignores the fact that all of these polls have been done by different companies, which, again, though they adhere to a certain basic code of conduct, they have potentially very different methodologies. So if we just look at the polls again, now if we try and sort of group together all the polls that have been done by individual different companies, we'll get something like this. So each of these lines represent a particular company. So at the top there, we've got Panel Base. And we've got here YouGov. And Survation, for example. And so you'll see that, to some extent, some of the patterns that we've been seeing in the average of polls is due to a different composition of the posters. So, for example, Angus Reid basically stopped doing opinion polls about the Scottish referendum about a year ago. So, could the fact that there's been a reduction in sort of the yes share of the vote at that point, could that be because of Angus Reid stopping polling and Ipsos Mori taking over? And also, I mean, we can see that sort of all these different polling companies, though there's a gap between them, they still all sort of show us sort of the same general sort of trend. So maybe we can try and put this into like a modeling framework. So what we're going to do is that we're going to put in a very simple sort of model, really. We're going to assume that the underlying pattern variation is smooth. Now, there's possibly reasons just to dispute this claim, because I mean, if you look at the media narrative, there's a lot of focus on, you know, he said what, or whether there's a white paper being published and whether that has an impact on the poll. But if we just go back to the polls, we can see that over the broad sort of, looking at the big scale, the variation seems to be generally fairly smooth overall. And especially if you bear in mind that there's a substantial, there's about a 3% margin of error for each of these polls because of the fact that they're only sampling about 1,000 people. So another thing is that we try and model in this effect of the different posters. Now, there's a variety of ways you can do that, but the simplest way that we've adopted here is to just assume that there's going to be a constant shift vertically up and down, depending on who is doing the polling. So if we just sort of put that in, we'll end up with a criteria about that, and so that's just a very standard spline sort of thing. And if we apply that sort of model to the data, then we're going to end up with something like this. So each of these red lines represents an individual polling company, and we can sort of extrapolate out from the polls that we had so far up to the current day, and well, up to the day of the election itself. So that's very simple to do in R. Now, and you can see that actually that doesn't fit too badly. I mean, TNS, BR, and B is sort of below the curve and then goes up over it a bit. But it's all sort of fairly within the sort of pattern of natural variation that you'd really expect from something like from a really opinion poll. And in principle, I mean, following Nate Silver's suggestion, we could just take an average across the polling companies and looking at the predictions that we have for the final day. So, however, there are shortcomings to this averaging approach. Now, all the different polling companies, as we see, give different results. And these different results represent their differences in methodology. So they have different ways of doing the sampling, for example. YouGov, for example, does a methodology where they keep a panel of people and they keep asking them the same question again and again. And also, we also know that YouGov in the past have disproportionately sampled Labour voters. Now, the second thing that they each do is that they have different ways of weighting the sample. Now, no particular poster is going to have an absolutely representative and random sample. I mean, the fact that some of them do telephone sampling and some of them do online sampling, for example, creates a potentially biased sample. And so what they do is that they use various methods of weighting to create a more representative sample of the electorate. Now, they do this in slightly different ways. And the most controversial part of this is the way they sample for political affiliation. So, for example, as I just said, YouGov in their raw sample, they turn up a lot of Labour voters, but then they have to sort of try and sort of rebalance their sample to reflect the political mix-up of people in Scotland. And the way they do that is that they ask people how they voted in the previous election. And then they match that up to how people actually voted in the election. And so the way you do that is quite different across these polling companies. And you can see here, so this is Survation. At the end of January, they took a poll here. And now, at the start of February, they took a second poll, and this is a huge jump in between them because they changed the way they do their weighting. So you might notice that I mean, the polling companies, broadly, they belong to two sort of main groups. There's sort of Survation, panel-based, and Ipsos Mori at the top there, and then there's YouGov and TNS down here, and a lot of that is because because of this sort of difference in weighting methodologies. And then there's a big difference coming in from the way they ask the question. So in all the polls so far, there's been one poll that has given yes a lead over no. And this poll was sponsored by Yes Scotland, And it was asking them a lot of questions about, my impression here was that what happened was that they were asking people a lot of questions about what they felt was good about Scotland. And then they asked them, are they going to vote for independence or not? And so suddenly, there's this big spike here. Suddenly, over 50% of the people said yes. But now, the thing is, there hasn't been a lot of independence referendums. It's difficult to say which of these methodologies are correct. Indeed, it could well be that on the day of the referendum itself, this sort of outlier poll, this poll with the over 50% yes, could represent better the actual sort of feelings of the electorate on the day than all of these polls down here. So if we just relied on the average poll, then we can potentially sort of mislead ourselves if broadly all of these pollsters are making, many of these pollsters are making the incorrect sort of assumptions about how things actually turn out. One further source of error, if that's not worrying enough, is that significant changes in public opinion during the last few months or even weeks of a campaign do actually happen. And they can even happen without some kind of precipitating event to make them happen. For example, the Yes campaign is very fond of the last Scottish parliamentary election for one reason, which is that about 2 months before the elections, Labour were ahead, and then it turned out on the day to be a landslide for the SNP. So these changes in opinion do happen. And even if we just look at the final poll before elections, opinion polls can fail because they could make fundamentally incorrect assumptions about whether people do what they say they're going to do. So if we just look at the last AV referendum, so at 75 days before the referendum, you can see a general pattern. There's one poll that says that yes to the alternative vote. So this was carried out in 2011. So there was one poll that said that no was going to win, but all these polls are saying that yes, it was going to succeed, and the curve seems to be sort of bottoming out, and so yeah, I mean, you can see maybe yes was going to succeed, but now fast forward, and unfortunately you can't really see it on the graph here, but what you see is that suddenly all these polls, all these opinion polls plummet down to here, but on the day of the election, this red dashed line, which is what the actual results was actually below all but one of the opinion polls so far. So the opinion polls really didn't do very well for this AV referendum. So how do we factor in all these problems? Well, some people have suggested modeling this approach, but we are sort of afflicted by the shortage of data, really. It's difficult to say which of these past elections this independence referendum is really like. Could it be like one of the referendums? Could it be like one of the elections? Could it be like, for example, the 2012 presidential elections, where the opinion polls reflected really very well the final results of the day? Or could it be like one of these referendums where suddenly something changed? Could it be that these opinion polls companies have made some kind of dramatic mistake? So I think that to avoid getting bogged down on making assumptions, what we can do is that we can use a randomization-based approach. So what we're going to do is we're going to randomly select a polling company. So we're going to basically randomize over the house effect. And then we're going to randomly add on, plus or minus, the day 75 prediction error from a number of previous similar elections. So 75 was sort of days before election was when this slide was made. So basically, we're just going to look at previous elections and see how big a mistake we would have made using this methodology if we were trying to predict those elections from opinion polls. So if we just do this many times and we add it all up, we'll create a distribution of predicted results. So we'll end up with something like this. So at the bottom end, we got these rare occurrences where things sort of really goes wrong with the opinion polls, and then we also have the top end as well. And we'll average it out around here-ish. And so we've considered a bunch of elections here. We've considered the AV vote, the 2010 UK general elections, the Welsh devolution referendum, and the 2011 Scottish Parliament election. It's a bit ad hoc how you pick these previous elections, but I think that these probably reflect best the past, the sort of similar past elections. And if we just look at the proportion of this proportion of these simulated results that come below 0.5, then that will give you a probability of no winning at about 69%. Now, obviously, this result is going to change as more polling results come in and as we get closer to referendum day. And clearly, we made a ton of assumptions here. When I was doing this analysis, I checked on someone else who was doing sort of similar work on trying to predict results of the referendum, but from a completely different basis. And what they were doing was that they were looking at the betting, the prediction markets. So people were putting on bets about whether or not, yes or no, we're going to win. And funnily enough, these things actually matched up exactly. Now, again, this slide was, everything I've said so far was based on the middle of July. So the question is, what's happened since July? And so, well, what has happened since? Well, we've had 2 television debates between Alex Salmond and Alistair Darling, and these have been followed with varying degrees of excitement. Supposedly, Alistair Darling won the first debate, and then Alex Salmond won the second. We've also had a large number of additional polls, and of course, we are now closer to a referendum. So if we look at how these new polls look on here, then, well, so with these polls that have been doing well for the polls that have been more pro-yes, things have generally sort of stayed roughly stable. Survation, for example, showed a big dip after the first referendum, but then after the second referendum, it popped right up. So all of these polls that are top, they basically remain constant. An interesting thing that's happened recently is YouGov, which have generally been, as I said, below all these, below panel base. Now, YouGov has recently leapt up, and on Monday, which is not shown on here, there's been a very recent YouGov poll which has put it right up here. So YouGov is now one of the top posters in terms of showing a high yes share. So this is actually a reason for concern, because as our model has said, our model assumes that the gap between all these posters should stay roughly constant. So I was hoping that this effect was going to go away, but the Monday poll had really sort of strung a wrench in the works. So I mean, this is kind of a risk of giving a presentation on something that's sort of happening, something that is taking place, as you do to speak, as you give a presentation. So maybe it'll go away, maybe not, but I might need to rethink my analysis a bit there. Still, this is only a small number of polls that has sort of contradicted the results so far. So if we were to sort of fit the model again, so the red line is a new fit and the blue line is what we had before, you can see that it doesn't really make a massive difference. If anything, the stability of the polls at the top has sort of reduced our forecasts for the election day by a little bit. If you look at the sort of the simulated share votes, you'll see that it's tightened substantially from what it was before. Because this is mainly because of the fact that we're closer to a referendum day, so there's less time for things to really dramatically change. And so you see then that the share of the vote hasn't actually, the predicted share of the vote on election day hasn't really changed. So minus 20 days before the election is when this slide was made. So all of this is just projections forward. But the probability of no winning has generally gradually risen up to about here, at about 75% to 80% right now. Of course, this hasn't included the very latest polls. So I think that if you include the latest polls, it will probably dip a bit. But the core point here is that there is still a substantial possibility for the yes campaign to succeed, because there is still substantial uncertainties within these opinion polls. However, the campaign is really yes is for no to lose, because yes has to do something to reduce, yes has to do something to increase the yes share of the vote, because otherwise, as we get closer to referendum day, the sort of uncertainties are going to reduce, and we're going to see a high increased probability of no winning if nothing else happens. So, does anyone have any questions then? A bit of us. Yeah. At the back there. Well.
Have you tried to use assumptions based on recent election results in Scotland to take account of the undecided people?
The difficulty here is that, well, let's see, undecided people. I mean, you know, to answer the question directly, I haven't sort of modeled the undecided people very much, because it's difficult to, well, firstly, that there isn't a lot of undecided people. A lot of people, the interesting thing with this poll is that, with this sort of referendum campaign, is that everyone seems to say that they're going to vote, and everyone says that they definitely know who they're going to vote for, and then they change their minds. So the undecided people, it's difficult to really understand who these undecided people are. And undecided people tend to say that they are less likely to vote on the end of the day. So to some extent, the way that we projected forward with these splines does model the effect of the undecided people picking one way or another. But yeah, we haven't sort of explicitly modeled them, because, again, I mean, it's difficult to relate this election to past elections.
Okay, any other questions?
Thank you. It was a fascinating presentation. Look eagerly in a couple of weeks' time to see what happens.
Yeah.
Kind of just related to that previous point, what about turnout on the day? You're kind of assuming, I think, that because people say they're going to vote and they know who they're going to vote for, that on the day there'll be a huge turnout and people will vote either yes or no, and there'll be no sport papers and all those sorts of things. But have you looked at the actual turnout in things like the Scottish referendum vote and the other things you used in your modelling? Because I thought that generally in elections across the UK, turnout was on the day was kind of just going down and down and down, and that fewer people are actually bothering. So yes, they will respond to the pollsters, but actually getting them going on the day and putting their vote in the ballot box is a kind of completely different thing. And while political parties have kind of mechanisms and machinery for getting people out there, you know, they go and knock on people's doors and give them cards and all that, I don't know whether the yes and no campaigns are going to look into that and do that sort of thing as well. So have you got any thoughts about what actually might happen on the day? You know, horrible wet windy day in Highlands, I'm sure there aren't many such days, but you know.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, the question of sort of whether these predictions of turnout turns out, yeah, no pun intended, it is a good question. To some extent, the way that we've done the analysis by including these sort of errors in this randomization scheme, to some extent that factors in failures in past elections to predict turnout accurately. Now, the problem is that, I mean, to some extent that's factored in, but to build on your question in that there is problems here, the problem is that this election isn't quite like the past elections because there's a lot of social expectation going on. I mean, if you looked into media, the not voting in this election is viewed very negatively. What does that mean, though? I mean, yes, we don't really know what that really means because on the one hand, that could mean that, you know, there's going to be a lot of people turning out. And, you know, I mean, in previous elections, people, when you ask them, I mean, in previous elections, opinion posters haven't been too bad at predicting turnout. But if you ask them afterwards, if you ask people afterwards, did you vote? People tend to say yes, they did when they didn't. I mean, this social expectation thing does sort of go into this, but well, there's not really much we can do except that hope that our randomization scheme adequately captures it. I mean, this is really about the best we can do without sort of, I don't know, getting a time machine. Any other questions?
Okay, we have one more question at the back there.
Do the pollster companies tend to choose one methodology and stick with it through the whole campaign? So it's constant on time, or are they constantly tweaking to try and improve the way they do things?
Overall, the pollster companies, they take one methodology and they stick with it. The point that I pointed out with Servation and the big jump, that's kind of an aberration because I think that was the main posting company that changed their results. I mean, changed their methodology. I mean, there was also, I suppose, the one yes Scotland-sponsored poll, which was a bit sort of, you know, unusual. But yeah, I mean, the post companies do sort of stick with their methods. So I mean, the recent thing with the YouGov, the big change might well be. I mean, I think that. I mean, personally, I would say that it's probably explained by the particular demographics that they tend to sort of sample more of, and on actual sort of people changing their minds instead of sort of changes in methodology.
Do you produce regular predictions? I know, is it John Curtis produces predictions for the British general election, and there's another guy in Oxford who also produces them weekly, I think. Have you produced a set of predictions for the Scottish referendum, or is it simply a continuing process?
Well, unfortunately I don't have. There's no live website, which sort of doesn't really, which I guess the previous presentation sort of suggests I should really do something about. But I mean, the curve here that I've shown is basically the results of this analysis as you would get if you had conducted them on that particular day. So what you see is that I mean, I mean, just to sort of explain this again, I mean, so basically, if we were doing this analysis with all the polls conducted before, 60 days before the election, we would have this probability of winning. And so there's sort of, I mean, you can see with this sort of, I mean, is this sort of what you're looking for, basically?
Nearly. Does that curve change with time? If I had looked at that graph, say, 2 months ago, would it have been the same shape for that period? So if that's the graph you're producing now, if I looked at that graph, say, 20 days ago, would it have looked the same apart from the period between now and then?
Yeah.
Okay, so I could take that as a stable set of predictions.
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
So I mean, what this is saying is that if I was doing analysis 60 days ago, I would have gotten this result.
Okay, that's fair enough.
And so the only thing that would change is this part here, which is the predicted change in the probability of winning if no new polls come out.
Fair enough. So on September the 18th or thereafter, I presume if I look at this graph, it will constitute a stable set of the predictions you would have made at any given time?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, I've got time for one more if anybody has any questions. Will you be putting a bet on yourself, Sue?
Well, no, I said earlier on that the prediction the betting market were projecting a 69%. Now, when I was coming down, I heard on the radio that someone was putting on, they were making a £80,000 bet on no winning, but they'd only win 200,000. Which says to me that the bookmakers they actually they predict a very high probability of no winning indeed, and I don't know. I think that with my model, it suggests unfortunately something that is roughly the margin of profitability. So my model sort of suggests that you really shouldn't be making any bets, which is a bit of a shame, really.
Okay, well, thanks very much both Stu and Hannah for two very informative and topical presentations.